Pierre gets heckled by David Akin, a global news reporter during his presser. David Akin was not being bipartisan as a reporter, and when called out by the people, he issued an apology for his actions. Justin, Pierre and Jagmeet all have press conferences on how to tackle inflation in Canada. Here's the clip.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate your presence here today. Before I begin, let me just say that thank you very much. I'm being heckled here by thank you very much for your congratulations. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to begin my remarks now.
But will you take some questions afterwards? That's usually
Justintrudeau is out of touch and Canadians are out of money. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits have bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest that Canadians pay. The cost for workers and businesses to produce the goods that we buy. On top of that, Trudeau proposes yet more spending to bid up costs even further. The more he spends, the more things cost. It is just inflation. Their homes and to buy a home in the very first place. The reason that look, yeah. So I mean, we have basically a liberal heckler who snuck in here today.
I'm a liberal heckler.
Well,
David Akin, I work for Global News. I'm the chief political correspondent for that organization.
Are you going to let me make my statement?
You may remember me from the guy who actually reported first on the Prime Minister breaking the law.
Yeah. Are you going to let me make my statement?
We just like to ask a question. Say yes.
I've actually never seen you heckling the Prime Minister.
Ask Minister Baird back in the day.
The Prime Minister. Look, bottom line is this.
Are you going to take some questions at the end of this statement?
Yes, I'll be taking 2 questions at the very end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to start my statement again. Cost of government is driving up the cost of living. The more Trudeau spends, the more things cost. $500 billion of inflationary deficits mean more dollars bidding up the cost of the things we buy and the interest we pay. On top of that, inflationary taxes have inflated the cost of businesses and workers to produce those very same goods. The more Trudeau spends, the more things cost. Now, this is not about an accounting ledger. It is about real pain for real people. With food prices up 10% year over year, 4 in 5 Canadians are forced to cut back on their diets. We have 30-year-olds living in their parents' basements or trapped in tiny apartments from which they cannot escape. We have seniors who watch their savings evaporate because the cost of heat and other essentials has risen out of reach. Now, I thought Justintrudeau might have learned the lesson from the fact that I won the leadership. He suddenly took an interest in inflation. After 2 years of my warning him that his inflationary money-printing deficits would cause this problem, he finally admitted that there is a problem. And he announced he would hold a press conference today, one day after I issued a challenge to him. And the challenge was this, that he promised to all Canadians that there would be no new tax increases on seniors and workers. But today, he failed to make that commitment. And so Conservatives are putting him on notice that we will oppose any attempts by his government to raise taxes on working people or seniors in this country. Right now, he has scheduled tax increases on people's paychecks and on their heat, gas, and groceries. Canadians cannot afford these tax increases, and they come at exactly the worst time. And that is why Conservatives will lead the charge against them. We have also made other practical solutions. Cap government spending and cut government waste so that we can bring down the inflationary deficits and taxes that have caused the problems in the first place. Eliminate the carbon tax to bring down gas and grocery bills and to bring a net savings to families who are paying more under the tax than they get back under the rebates. Cancel the increases to payroll taxes and incentivize municipalities to speed up and lower the cost of building permits so we can get millions of new houses. That is Those are practical solutions that would lower the cost and make it possible for seniors to buy a good life with their savings and workers to buy a good life with their paychecks. Unfortunately, today, we saw none of those practical solutions. In fact, we saw more inflationary spending that will fail to solve the problem for everyday Canadians. You see, the problem with spending more money as a solution to inflation is that it simply pours more gasoline on the inflationary fire. And that is exactly what Justintrudeau continues to do. I'll give you an example. He says he's going to give people $500 to help with the rent. Well, that works out to $40 a month. In Toronto, that will not even buy you 1 day's rent for your $2,300 a month average rental cost for your apartment. So 1 day's rent and your money's gone, and you have to find another $2,000. And certainly won't make you any better able to buy a house, with the average house in Vancouver being over $1 million. $500 is not even a drop in the bucket. We need to actually counter the inflation, the Justinflation that this government has caused, rather than trying to spend more money to make the problem worse. So once again, Conservatives will fight tooth and nail against the inflationary taxes that the Trudeau government is putting forward, and in favor of bringing inflation down so that paychecks go further.
One, if I could get your thoughts on Alain Raiss, but the second is, how is it not fair game for the federal government to spend taxpayers' money on helping low-income people today, this minute, afford some of the essentials of everyday life? But on Alain Raiss as well, please, Mr. Poilievre.
All of that is fine. The problem is that the money will be vaporized by inflation. As I said earlier, $500 in housing assistance for an entire year, when the average rent is over $2,000 in many of our big cities per month, that money will go up in smoke for the average family. What we need are more apartments for people to live in, more houses for them to buy, and lower taxes so that their paychecks go further. And that is what Conservatives are fighting for, and that is why we have said we will oppose any tax increases. Now, I would note that one of the tax increases that Mr. Trudeau promises hits the working poor the hardest. He wants to raise payroll taxes. There is no personal exemption on those. That means that from the very first dollar a worker begins earning, they start paying that tax. And so in percentage terms, payroll tax hikes are the hardest on the poorest people. So that is why Conservatives will fight tooth and nail against any tax increase. Our working poor need the chance to keep their paychecks so that they can pay their bills, and that is why Conservatives believe in low taxes.
To be affected by the devastating flooding in Pakistan, and we stand in solidarity with them. We know Canadians want to help, and we're ready to match that help. The federal government will match donations you make to the humanitarian coalition up to $3 million until September 28th. These funds will help provide life-saving services to those in need. We are also allocating an additional $25 million in urgent humanitarian funding and longer-term development assistance to help with recovery and rebuilding. This is, of course, in addition to the over $5 million we've already committed to help the millions of people in Pakistan who are dealing with this horrific climate disaster, and we will continue to look at other ways we can help. This week, caucus is meeting here in St. Andrews by the Sea to talk about the important issues facing Canadians, like the cost of living. Global inflation, caused by COVID-19 and Putin's invasion of Ukraine, has made cost of living a real challenge for lots of people. All summer, members of Liberal caucus have been talking to Canadians, listening to people's worries about their future, about how difficult it is to make ends meet right now. And our government has been hard at work on a plan that will deliver relief to millions of Canadians. We've already delivered on childcare. We've delivered an increasing Canada Child benefit. We continue to step up in a range of ways. But today, we're announcing additional targeted new measures that will support the middle class and people working hard to join it. These will be the very first pieces of legislation that we introduce when the House returns. The first element of our plan is to deliver relief to millions of Canadians by doubling the GST tax credit for 6 months. This will provide hundreds of dollars of support to Canadians, including half of all families and more than half of all seniors in the country. For example, parents with 2 kids could receive up to an extra $467 this fall to help with the cost of living. Second, as promised earlier this year, we're moving forward on dental. This is the first step, outlined in the Supply and Confidence Agreement, to develop a national dental care program. We aim to have that program started for those under 18, persons with disabilities and seniors by the end of 2023, with the full program completed by 2025. Thirdly, the federal government will also provide a one-time $500 top-up to the Canada Housing Benefit Program. People who currently receive hundreds of dollars in housing benefits each month through the program we introduced and co-fund with provinces and territories can also apply to receive this additional support. On top of that, this federal top-up would reach hundreds of thousands more low-income renters, with around 1.8 million Canadians eligible for it. These measures all put people at the center of our plan to grow the economy. They are targeted to the middle class and people working hard to join it, while we continue to be responsible with public finances. We are retaining fiscal firepower and, at the same time, ensuring that those who need support don't get left behind. The help we're announcing today will make a big difference for the people who get it in a targeted way that will not stoke inflation. Above all,
you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So we spent the past number of days in the North hearing from people, and we wanted to hear from people as they were impacted by the fact that the cost of everything is going up. And on top of that, interest rates are going up. And what we heard from people is they're feeling squeezed. It's getting harder and harder to buy groceries, to put food on the table, to put gas in their tanks. And what we've been calling for is, if the only solution to the cost of living going up and inflation squeezing people is the Bank of Canada to increase interest rates, that's just going to make life even harder for people. So we've been calling on this government, Justintrudeau, to do something to help people out in this time. And the response from the Liberal government, from Justintrudeau, has been, it's not our fault, or it's worse in other countries. Neither of those responses helps a family that is hurting right now because the cost of living is going up. None of those responses make it easier for someone who's feeling squeezed with inflation. So we fought hard and have been demanding since the spring that the Liberal government step up and give people some respect, the dignity to be able to afford their own groceries. And we have won. We have forced this government to deliver 3 things. Each of these items would not have happened but for the fact that we forced the government to deliver on this respect for people. We're putting money back in people's pockets by doubling the GST tax credit. That's going to put about $600 in the pockets of nearly 12 million Canadians. We're putting money back into Canadians' pockets who are feeling the squeeze with rents going up by increasing the Canadian housing benefit. And we're delivering on what we forced this government to do, dental care, starting with kids under 12. Families will receive money in their pockets. A check will be sent out to them to cover the cost of going to see a dentist. This is real support for families. While Pierre Poilievre has talked about cutting investments, cutting government spending, which would cut investments into things like public transit, which would hurt workers like the workers that I just met here in Alstom, workers who depend on investments being made into public transit because we know we need better public transit. So there's good jobs that workers can actually go to work and build the infrastructure and build the public transit that we need. Pierre would cut those jobs. Pierre would cut healthcare at a time when we know we need to invest in healthcare. Make sure we've got a strong healthcare that's there for people when they need it. So New Democrats have shown the way that we have forced this government to deliver for Canadians while Liberals were out of touch and while the Conservatives want to cut We want to invest in people, put more money back in your pockets, and take care of people with the respect and dignity that they deserve, workers. So by doubling the GST tax credit, that's going to put money in the pockets of workers. That's their money. That's their GST. We're putting more of it back in their pockets. That's something that we made happen. That's going to help out people in the North and across Canada. We also force this government to increase help for people that need some help to pay their rent. And that's going to go out to about 2 million Canadians, again, across the country. And then dental care. This is for the nearly 9 million Canadians who don't have any coverage. We have forced this government to start with kids 12 and under to receive the help they need to be able to take care of their teeth. This is about respect and about dignity, and we have forced this government to deliver. We know there's a lot more, but I want to be clear. The Liberals and the Conservatives have not been focused on getting people help. The Liberals have said it's not their fault and that it's worse in other countries. The Conservatives want to cut investments, cut support. We're talking about putting money back in your pockets, helping out people, and that's what we've done, and we're going to continue to do even more of that.
You were chairing the plant today. I asked what you heard from the
Well, we've seen the incredible expertise that this plant has, the history that this plant has in delivering real infrastructure for public transit. So many of the infrastructure, or so many of the public transit projects that we see across this country are cars that were built here in this facility. These are trains that were built here in this facility, and people here are ready to get back to work, and they need to be able to build more projects. And so what we have heard from workers here, and what we absolutely believe is the right thing to do, is when we use public money to invest in things like public transit, we need to make sure that there's a local content requirement. We absolutely believe that's the right thing to do. And we've long been calling for the federal government to be investing public money into projects that create jobs in our country. And so that's something very similar to what was raised here. We believe that's the right approach. And we are calling for a reversal of Doug Ford's decision to cut the local content requirement, as the provincial NDP has done. We think that's the wrong decision to cut the local content requirement. We want to see it at least 25%. And at the federal level, we think that there's opportunities where we can go beyond that amount as well. In the right circumstances, we should be making sure if we spend our own money, it should go towards creating jobs in our country. And it should go towards local content. And that's something that makes a lot of sense and something that New Democrats have long believed. Absolutely. What we did is we used our power and got it in writing. We forced the government to deliver on a large project like dental care. That's a multi-year project. It's going to take a number of years to develop. And we're proud that we're able to use our power to get something meaningful for Canadians, to force this government to do something meaningful for Canadians. In addition, we forced this government to deliver on something that was outside of what we had initially forced them to write on paper, and that's doubling the GST tax credit. So we've shown, not only have we forced this government to deliver on things that we've got in writing, but we also forced this government to do things outside of what we forced them to write down on paper. And we're going to continue to do that, because we have shown again and again, unlike the Liberals who are out of touch, think that it's good enough to say that things are worse in another country instead of actually focusing on what people need here, and the Conservatives who want to cut the very things that Canadians want to see more of. We want to see more investments in public transit. We want to see more investments in our healthcare, particularly when right now our healthcare is at risk of privatization. Conservatives want to cut. We're focused on making sure people get respect. And that means investing in healthcare. And that means putting money in people's pockets. And we made that happen.
Is the disconnect between the jobs, job opportunities, and the workers? And when do you see the solution?
I think there's a couple of areas of solution. One is wages. We know that there are a lot of jobs, a lot of job opportunities, but when the wages don't keep up with inflation, when wages don't keep up with the cost of living, it doesn't encourage workers to pursue that particular work opportunity if they're going to work in an area where they're not going to be able to earn enough to support their family or support themselves. So we need good wages. We know that immigration is a part of the solution to make sure we've got enough folks to work the jobs. And the North has really shown how that works, that we need to have a good immigration policy to bring in workers, to bring in people to fill those positions that are available. But wages are important. We need to have a good immigration policy, and we need to make sure that we've got good training that connects training, the opportunities that exist with the workers that want to do those jobs.